Good morning, everybody. We're here, I think, to begin, hopefully the last chapter of what has been a very long story when it comes to the county corruption investigation. And it has had many different phases and moments in it. And I think this is likely to be one of the last, if not the last. And if you think about the chronology of what happened to this community and what happened in terms of the prosecution of those individuals that were responsible for it, we've gone through a number of different phases. It started with a federal criminal investigation. That was followed up by a federal prosecution. And then you had some state investigation by Prosecutor McGinney and some state prosecution by Prosecutor McGinney. Now, where do we fall in terms of pursuing things on a civil matter? Well, some of you veterans and the media may recall that when we first took office, we said that we thought that part of our mission was to make sure that we would do everything possible to make sure that the taxpayers were going to be made whole, and that we would explore all of our options. And that would include any civil legal options that we might have. Now, we didn't know if we would have any of those options, because when something is prosecuted criminally, it gets very complicated as to whether or not there's also civil liability. But we said that we would look at that, and I personally said that. I thought that was part of my responsibility. So in the very early months of the administration, I challenged our law director, Director McCloof, and his team to say, let's continue to monitor the developments on the criminal side and see if there are any opportunities for us to make the taxpayers of Cuyahoga County whole if they ended up losing taxpayer funds as a result of any of this conduct. And what we're here to announce today, and we're going to be very circumspect in the way that we talk about it because now it's pending litigation, but that, again, I think we're starting to close this final chapter. The criminal prosecutions are apparently over on both the state side and the federal side, and we have, and I'm going to have the law director get into more detail about it, but we've now filed a civil action that we think is going to help close this chapter once and for all. So I want to turn it over to our law director. First, I do want to express my thanks to Law Director McCloof and his team. These are issues they've been looking at for quite some time. There's significant legal complexity involved here. I think they've done a masterful job in terms of trying to represent the taxpayer in this matter. But I want to turn it over to Director McCloof to summarize in general terms what we're talking about doing here. Director?
Thank you very much. And I think Richard has circulated a copy of the complaint with many of you, but basically the complaint has 13 counts against 10 defendants. They are as follows: Jones Lang LaSalle Great Lakes Corporate Real Estate Partners, that's the entity that formerly used to be known as the Staubach Company. The parent company, Jones Lang LaSalle, Vincent Russo and two of his companies, Vincor and Garibaldi Holdings, Vince Carboni's company, M2J1, and Harvey Oppman and one of his companies, and two other companies that are associated with the Oppman transaction, known as Midwest Entertainment Ventures and Anatomy Nightclub. And basically, this is what the complaint alleges. Back in the early 2000s, Great Lakes wanted to get into business, doing that type of business in Cuyahoga County. They were having difficulty doing business for local governments in the county itself. So they ended up retaining former attorney Anthony Calabrese to help them get business with Cuyahoga County and other local entities. And Calabrese delivered, and they were able to have a meeting with Commissioner Dimora, and then the very first transactions were actually the building that we're in right now and the Marion building that they obtained initially. Then in the latter part of 2003, the county issued the RFP for the Consolidated Administration building. And again, they met with Dimora while the RFP was pending, and they submitted their proposal. While they were waiting to learn who the party who will succeed on that proposal that they submitted for the consolidated headquarters, they entered into a contract with one of Vince Russo's company by the name of Vincor in June 2004 to pay him $2,000 in 2004 in June, and again in $2,000 in July of 2004 for providing, and you'll hear that term repeatedly, government relations work, in quotations, for doing work in Cuyahoga County. Finally, Great Lakes was selected, and in September of 2004, while their agent, Anthony Calabrese, was negotiating the contract with Cuyahoga County, they went on and entered into 2 additional contracts. They entered into another contract with Vince Russo in October of 2004, actually October 1, 2004, and again, this time under the name of Garibaldi Holdings, the other entity that they used, which interestingly was also its address was Anthony Calabrese's address as well. And under this contract, they agreed to pay Vince Russo $150,000 again for government relations work in connection with the Cuyahoga County contract. They also entered into another contract with Carboni, again for government relations work, and for $324,800,000, the contract that they entered with Carboni. This is in October of 2004, yet before knowing that they were finally, they had the contract, they had been selected, they were doing the negotiations, but the contract itself was not fully executed at that time. 5 days later, after they entered into those contracts with Carboni and with Vince Russo, the contract was executed on the county side on October 5th, 2004, and he had the fully executed contract. Once the contract was fully executed, Great Lakes wrote its agent, Anthony Calabrese, thanking him for getting them the Cuyahoga County contract, and they entered into yet another round of contracts with Russo and with Carboni. So on November 1, 2004, they entered into a second contract with Carboni for $30,000 for doing services under what they called Phase 1 and Phase 2 of the contract. And they entered into, this time, the third contract with Vince Russo. And this contract was with Vincor doing business as Garibaldi, all these entities. And under this contract, Great Lakes agreed to pay $140,000 to Vince Russo's company, which was paid between December 2004 and October 2005. Again, the term you keep hearing again, for doing government relations work in connection with assisting them with the Cuyahoga County contract. And Great Lakes paid $140,000 to Garibaldi for that contract. So to sum it up, Great Lakes, the complaint alleges that Great Lakes ended up paying about $300,000 to Vince Russo related entities and $355,000 to Carboni entities in connection with the Cuyahoga County contract. Other than the contracts themselves and the checks that the payments were made under them, the complaint alleges that Great Lakes has no records of what the actual services were that were provided by Vincor, by Garibaldi, or by Carboni. And as we all know, none of those entities actually engages as their primary business in doing government relations. That works tend to be normally done by lawyers and other entities of that nature. By November 19 of 2004, Great Lakes had already completed the initial phase of the work and reported the results to Cuyahoga County. The Ameritrust site was 4th overall. It was not, by any stretch of the imagination, the top site. Then they met, they had a meeting on June 21, 2005 with was Anthony Calabrese, Great Lakes, and Commissioner Dimora. They met at the Holiday Inn on Rockside Road. That was on January 21, 2005. 4 days thereafter, Great Lakes issues the final report, where Ameritrust all of a sudden became the first recommended choice. So within 2 months, Ameritrust went from being the 4th site to being the highest selected and recommended sites, and yet there are no records that Great Lakes is able to show that any additional facts or any additional analysis that came in that actually prompted the moving of the Ameritrust site from 4th to the 1st site. They then asked for the commissioner's approval to proceed with what they called with the 3rd phase of their work. That approval never came, and they ended up terminating the contract, where Great Lakes ended up being paid $2.6 million approximately. So for a total approximate amount, what they ended up making was $3 million over the for the entire contract, most of which, by the way, was done by subcontracts. In the meantime, Vince Carboni, through Anthony Calabrese, forms a new limited liability company by the name of M2J1. And despite the contract between Great Lakes and Carboni having been with Carboni, Great Lakes issues the payment, the $324,000 payment, to M2J1 in two checks, one for $25,000 and one for $299,000, which it charged to the Cuyahoga County contract. But our review of the records shows that despite being charged internally by Great Lakes to the Cuyahoga County contract, the $324,000, approximately $325,000 due to Carboni, and that it was actually paid to M2J1, was not included on the Great Lakes budgets, kept on the Cuyahoga County contract while the work was ongoing. This was different, by the way, from another contract that they had with Carboni on the very same deal for $30,000, where they actually billed Carboni directly, and it was on their budgets, and it was everything was done in the way that you would expect it to be done. Once M2J1 was paid, and this came out in the federal indictments, obviously we know that part of it, that was distributed to three others. $99,000 was distributed to Burlwood Holdings, which was an Anthony Calabrese company. $70,000 was paid to Calabrese friend, and another $70,000 ended up going to J. Kevin Kelly. Finally, the piece about Oppman's. Great Lakes' recommendation of the Ameritrust site and the county's purchase of it necessitated the need for additional parking. So the negotiations began for the Oppman garage. Mr. Oppman, the negotiations were not going to Mr. Oppman's satisfaction. Knowing that Steve Pumper was within Commissioner Dimora's inner circle, Mr. Oppman engaged Steve Pumper for $250,000 to help speed up the contract through the county process. Pumper meets with Mr. Dimora, and the agreement was that if the county were to proceed on the purchase of the Oppman garage, that Mr. Dimora would be paid $35,000. That obviously wasn't in the process of happening, and then Pumper requested $180,000 of the $250,000 bribe to be paid to an Anatomy nightclub and Midwest Entertainment Venture, and there were some subsequent work how they tried to document the deal after the fact, which is why those two other entities are named. So the complaint has a whole number of claims. I'm not going to go through them, but you all have a copy of the complaint, just a sort of quick recitation of the facts, from fraud to specific statutory procedure for the recovery of misspent funds to issues of fiduciary duty when you're acting as an agent to conspiracy. So there's a whole number of claims in the complaint, and I'll turn it over back.
Sure. I think that probably says it all. Any questions?
Just because we did a story a long time ago, on the asbestos that was in the release, the press release you put out yesterday, what is your claim regarding the asbestos removal contract?
There is nothing about the asbestos removal in this complaint. I think what happened is those were probably part of our damages, in the sense that we had the damages that the county sustained in cleaning up the asbestos after having to clean up the asbestos for that site.
But I'm just asking because your release last night says, talking about the purchase of the Ameritrust Tower, a decision that helped prompt the FBI into then county probe into then County Commissioner Jimmy Dimora's role in the sale, as well as his efforts in an award at an asbestos removal contract.
I'm not sure about that language, but it's the asbestos component is not part of the lawsuit. That's fine.
Is it over? Will it ever have a lid on it?
Well, I think, yeah, I can't speak on the criminal side, but we can only speak for ourselves. We think that we're wrapping it up the best we can, and I don't see anything else probably coming out of it. And there was never any guarantee that we could ever get to this point, because just because there's been criminal wrongdoing doesn't mean that there's necessarily a civil case. But look, this whole thing started because when you look at the transaction on its face, it just doesn't make sense. And so my challenge to the law department was, okay, it doesn't make business sense, but is there a civil case or not? And as the years went by, we got some additional information from things that came out of the prosecution of it, and that allowed us to get to where we are today. And I hope that this is is the final word of it, or at least when this case is resolved. Yeah, Eric?
Great Lakes has said in the past, and we'll probably say again, we recommended that the county lease the Ameritrust complex, not that they buy it, and that may be part of their defense. What's your response to that? Why is it that their recommendation to lease is still relevant to the damages that the county incurred?
Again, I don't want to get into any of the legal theories and damages in the case, but I would just say it's rather interesting. Without regard to whether it's a lease of a purchase, I think we've always contested the suitability of that site for a county administration building, regardless of how you ended up being in that building. And isn't it rather interesting that we recommend and we, all these expenses are allegedly charged to see how suitable the building is so that you can tear it down? I mean, why are we testing the suitability of that building and the height of the ceiling and the stability and the plumbing and all of that if you're going to tear it down eventually? So I think the whole deal just never made any sense.
Do you have access to, I should know this, but do you have access to anything that was said in the grand jury by Jimmy Dimora or anybody else under Prosecutor McGinty? Is that information you or the prosecutor's office can access as part of this?
I think we'll go through this case and go through the discovery in this case and everything that we have. I'm not going to get into specifically, but obviously the criminal prosecutions is what helped bring this case
Yeah, I'm just
to where it
asking
is
legally,
today.
you have a right to the information. What was in there? Do you know?
We've seen some of the documents from
And is it
that were
helpful? Is it part of what helped you file the suit?
It helped bring this lawsuit.
What are the total damages you're seeking?
The complaint at this point alleges the standard damages that you do in any complaint, which is above $25,000. Again, that will be part of, there will be expert testimony on it, and it will be a complex formula, but if you think of it, we paid Staubach $3 million for work basically that was over 5 months. Then once you acquired the building, you had years and years of ownership where the maintenance costs were approaching $1 million a year. But again, what's legally recoverable or not, I'm not going to make any statements here that end up being evidence in the court.
And I'm sure a lot of people try to do government relations with somebody in your position. It's pretty easy to distinguish what is regular government relations and what is somebody trying to pay a bribe, is that correct? Pretty easy to distinguish here, right? I mean,
the amounts that were involved here are pretty astronomical. You're talking about a pretty short window of time, and you're talking about over $500,000 spent. I mean, a huge portion of the total contract is all in government relations, and it's being paid to individuals that, well, I mean, it'll be one of the subjects of the lawsuit, but whether or not they are true experts in government relations is a real question. And I think if you look at their backgrounds and their expertise, I don't consider that to be legitimate government relations. It just seemed to be basically that they had some connections, and it was inappropriate. And you know, again, it wasn't my job to either draft this complaint or come up with the theory of the case, but I can remember even before being in this current office, Bill, and just talking to people that were truly professionals when it came to commercial real estate development or government relations. They just said, these numbers are completely out of whack. They don't make any sense. They don't make sense in an arm's length business transaction. Now, thinking that the county got a raw deal and being able to actually file a suit that has merit are two different things. And so we had to wait until there were enough facts that were available through the resolution of the criminal matters where we felt like we had enough to bring a suit that I think has merit.
What do you believe Jimmy Dimora did that was inappropriate?
Well, we don't have that much time. He did lots of things that were inappropriate.
What do you believe Jimmy Dimora did that was inappropriate regarding these events in 2005 and 2007? Involving the building and the complex and the purchase.
Again, Eric, and we're not trying to avoid the question. The complaint is actually quite detailed, and if you go through the complaint, but I think just if you see to the number of meetings with which he was having with them, meetings while things were under consideration, ultimately even the $35,000 on the Oppman part, the relationship with Calabrese. So I'm going to leave it generic as that, but I would refer you to the complaint, because if you read the complaint, there's quite a bit of detailed information. Again,
Were there any statute of limitations issues here that you had to deal with?
those are those are, again, those are always issues that you have to deal with in any case. And I think we think we've pled claims that should survive in court.
Is there any overlap in the conduct in this lawsuit versus stuff that might have been criminally prosecuted as part of the corruption probe?
You had Anthony Calabrese plead in the state court action for part of the bribing that was in relation to the Ameritrust. I think it was the money that ended up going to Kevin Kelly at the end.
So are the people that you sued people who ended up not being prosecuted for these actions that you guys are alleging?
Again, I don't want to go into back and forth, the comparison of the criminal versus the civil. You're doing them with different intents. I mean, what we're trying to do here is make the taxpayers whole. So our intent here is how can we recover the money that the taxpayers lost, or as much of it at least as we can. That's a little bit different than when you're doing things for criminal and purposes where there is punishment, where the remedies are different, and the standards of proof are very different between a criminal case and a civil case.
That's right.
So
Some of the people referenced in the complaint were prosecuted,
Yeah.
and some weren't. But it's a different standard, it's a civil standard.
So Chief, follow up with Jay's question. There's in most cases, a contractor can only sue with an 8-year statute of limitations, and here you're at about 9. So tell us how you are going to deal with that.
There are a number of issues. First of all, that 8-year statute of limitations was for contracts that were entered after the statute got amended, not before. It's under the former statute, it's 15 years. So that's what the statute of limitations for contracts are. But I think we're comfortable that we've addressed the issues of statute of limitations to our ability, to the best of our ability in that complaint. And I'm sure those issues we'll see how they fold out in court, but we're comfortable that we have the resolution for those.
And Great Lakes is an ongoing concern. Are there other entities that you can, it's the blood out of the turnip, you may be right, but are there entities here that you can recover money from?
Yeah, the bar, I think Anatomy Bar is still Oppman, Mr. Oppman personally, I presume has got assets. So yes, even as part of the analysis in terms of when you sue, liquidity and the ability to recover is one of the things that is always part of the analysis that you do. But I think Great Lakes alone is quite a bit of resources.
Does that suggest that you would have, had he had any money, you would have sued Jimmy Dimora? Included Jimmy Dimora in this?
Again, I really don't want to get into the legal strategies in terms of who you sue and who you don't sue. We'll be giving our case too openly here. We're satisfied that we sued the right defendants in this action.
Because he might have immunity because he was acting as a public official.
I'm not going to get. I don't know if that even is an applicant, but I'm not going to get there.
So Vincent Carbone is one of that is mentioned here as a statutory agent. He later went on to have a role in the aborted headquarters project. I think it was construction manager of the aborted tear down, the asbestos and so forth. Have you seen any connections that trouble you between him being a statutory agent here for M2J1 and his later role working for the county?
That is one of those questions that is getting too much into the weeds. I think let's let the case work its way through the court system, and a lot of this stuff will be addressed in the pleadings and in the discovery that comes through that case.
Do you consider Jimmy Dimora to be the ringleader or the initiator in all of this, or how did this?
Look, he's been prosecuted and he's serving time as a result of what he did. But there were a lot of people that profited, and this case addresses some folks that profited. Did he profit by corruption in this county? Yes. Is he the only one that profited? No. And some of those matters were dealt with in the criminal context, and some of them are going to be dealt with in this context.
Yeah, do you have a sense from, this deal was, like you said, it stunk from the beginning,
Right.
looking at the numbers. He was one of 3 commissioners, the other 2 were not prosecuted. In your role, have you seen, was this just the way the county did business on a large portion of its business at the time, or is this an aberration?
I think, did the county ever make mistakes like this in the past? I don't know. I do think it's important to say that there have been a lot of honorable public officials that have worked in previous administrations under our previous system, and that this isn't the way that it worked. But at some point in time, Cuyahoga County government got infected by this. Doesn't mean that it touched everybody, but it infected a certain portion of it. And exactly how far it went is probably a matter for opinion or subjective, but we think that it at least infected this part of the county's operations.
But it's hard for us not to draw the conclusion you didn't sue the other two commissioners at this point.
They're not named defendants.
They're not named defendants.
Actually, none of the commissioners is named.
Well,
Well, that's right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.